to the investigative editor of Wikileaks, Sarah Harrison, and Alexa O'Brien, who provided an extensive archive of the only available transcripts of Chelsea Manning's closed trial. Welcome, Alexa, and welcome, Sarah.
Wikileaks about 4 years ago. She came from the Center for Investigative Journalism and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. From researching and coordinating the publication of hundreds of thousands of censored documents with media across the globe, to making that information accessible to the public on the internet, to fighting for her organization's ability to persevere in the face of extra-legal sanctions and the largest criminal investigation ever conducted into a publisher and its sources, which continues today. To protecting not only her own organization's sources, but those of other journalists and publishers. The tireless and courageous work of WikiLeaks investigation editor, Sarah Harrison, has enlightened and empowered public discourse in a manner few of her colleagues can credibly claim for themselves. Were it not for Harrison's work, our news would be dominated by stories about the imprisonment and prosecution of Edward Snowden by the US government. Were it not for her commitment to preserving our historical record, we would not know the facts surrounding the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians by US-led engagements in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia, or understand the whole-scale privatization of intelligence. It's a pleasure to speak with Ms. Harrison today. So on April 25th, the Department of Justice lawyers stated that the multi-subject criminal investigations into WikiLeaks and its sources continues. Prior to that, Laura Quattrus and Glenn Greenwald both made public entrances into the US. On the advice of your counsel, you've been advised not to return to the UK. Why can't you go home?
Well, the UK has a unique part of its terrorism law, which is called Schedule 7. Schedule 7 is about detaining people at ports, so airports, boat ports, any entrance or exit to the country. And what they can do there is they can detain anyone for questioning on no more than a hunch, as has just been proven in the recent Miranda judgment. When you're there, what we would generally expect to be the rights of someone being questioned are taken away. You have no right to silence. You must answer their questions or you're committing a crime. Because of my involvement in two very significant cases, for the US and UK governments, that being WikiLeaks and Snowden, my lawyers feel certain, or relatively certain, that I would be detained under Schedule 7, at which point, for reasons of source protection, I would not answer the majority of their questions, and therefore would be committing a crime upon entering my home country. You mentioned that Laura and Glenn had gone back to the US. They had very specific circumstances within which they did this, though. They were going to collect a very important and prestigious award, and they just went for a short period of time. If I were to try to return home to live, I would not have those protections. And so on those bases, it's advised that I remain here in Germany.
Why should Germany or any country grant Edward Snowden asylum?
Well, it's a question, it's a moral and ethical, but also a political question, this one, and of course a legal one. The law around asylum is that that most countries are signed up to, is that someone should be given asylum if they if they need it for their political opinion, or if they face persecution if they go home. Edward Snowden's act of disclosure was inherently a political act. He did this because the US government was breaking its own constitution and spying on its own citizens. In addition, if he went back to the United States, I think it is quite clear he would be persecuted. If you look at the trial of Chelsea Manning, the sentencing of Jeremy Hammond, this shows a record of persecution of these sorts of truth-tellers by the United States government. So on these two bases alone, he legally deserves asylum in most countries in the world. I think also morally and ethically, for having shown how our rights are being eroded and we're being spied on by a foreign government, it would be the correct thing to do for other countries to give him asylum. So therefore, I think the more interesting question is why people aren't giving him asylum. And I think that that is due to the US dominance, and people are too scared, governments are too scared, we've seen it in the statements coming out of the German government, to actually stand up for what is the right thing to do and for the values they purportedly believe in. And so for this reason, unfortunately, countries are holding back and are not giving him the asylum he deserves.
The US government claims that the programs are legal, albeit secret. And Snowden has said, quote, "For me, in terms of personal satisfaction, the mission's already accomplished. I've already won. As soon as the journalists were able to do work, everything that I had been trying to do was validated. Because remember, I didn't want to change society. I wanted to give society a chance to determine if it should change itself." So for you, would it be acceptable, in your opinion, if the American public decided that they would tolerate being spied on by their own government?
So firstly, going back to some points that you made in your in the actual question, the government, of course, is trying to say that they haven't broken any laws, but I think the revelations have made it perfectly clear that they have by spying on their own citizens. In addition, yes, Snowden's predominant first aim was to start a debate and see what happened with that, although I think he's made it perfectly clear that his own personal view is that this surveillance is excessive. So the question on whether I would be happy if the US decided it's okay, I'm not a US citizen. So what the United States does is not necessarily how I feel my government should be behaving. These revelations have shown that other governments are colluding with the United States. The Five Eyes Alliance, which my own country, the United Kingdom, is particularly a large part of. And so the question for me is, am I okay with what my government is doing or is allowing to be happening to me? I think that, this is obviously not okay for me. Our rights are being eroded. This is a very slippery slope. And I wish that my government would stand up for my rights more. The larger question, though, is, I think, why do our rights matter at all? Our rights are in place to keep our personal autonomy, to allow us not to be dominated by an outside power. With this erosion of rights that we see in these surveillance revelations, this is precisely what is happening. There is a large dominance that is coming into force and growing all the time around the world by the United States. This is a very large geopolitical issue, and you can see how the effects of this dominance in this geopolitical way with things like, I was just saying, how countries feel unable to give Snowden asylum, or you see the way they're able to yield this geopolitical pressure with regards to things like the climate conference in 2009 in Copenhagen, where they were surveilling the communications to find out how other countries were going to play to try and engineer that conference. And I think when it came out, for example, that Merkel's phone was being spied on, of course, there was a little bit of initial outrage by her, but I do wonder, maybe she suddenly sat there and thought, gosh, what are the contents of my calls? Maybe actually I shouldn't start stomping my feet about this because you don't know what will come out. And how that can be used. So, for me, this is a global issue, and for me, other nations around the world, and I should be standing up against this dominance and against this US surveillance, and I wish my country would do that.
So, governments obviously conduct foreign intelligence. Most governments do, that can afford it. etc. How is the nature of U.S. foreign intelligence activities pertaining to what Snowden disclosed significant or different?
To everybody spying? It's obvious. Countries spy. They generally, as you say, will have intelligence agencies. It is the nature of countries to try and do this. What is different about the United States surveillance is its scale and its quality. So it's conducted on a huge scale in a large variety of means. The ability to store this information, which is now at very low cost, is very pervasive. It means it's very pervasive. With the United States as well, their actual abilities are made very easy because of the huge budget which they have. The budget has doubled in the last 10 years. The number of people with national security clearance in the United States has doubled in just the last 4 years. There's now 5 million people with this clearance. That's the size of Norway. I mean, I think we'd all be very annoyed if every single person in Norway was running around collecting all our information. But we don't understand. We don't understand the significance of it when it's the other side of the globe, when these facts and figures they attempt to keep relatively hidden. So this huge, pervasive, at great scale, mass surveillance makes it inherently different to any other nation's spying capabilities. When something is that large, its quality changes in and of itself. It would be like trying to say that the hydrogen bomb is just another bomb. It's obviously not. It becomes a geopolitical tool. And I think that this dominance in this way is what makes the NSA surveillance very different to any other countries and far more worrying.
Something that it's interesting, following the coverage related to you specifically, one of the questions I was wondering is, what's it like to be the WikiLeaks cleaning lady? Like, there seems to be a complete, and I think part of that, it's my opinion, part of that has to do with the fact that you're female, to be quite honest. There's an element of it. And also, you came from the Center for Investigative Journalism and the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, and you've been with a new organization and the like. And I think a question that a lot of people perhaps don't understand is, why would WikiLeaks and your work at WikiLeaks, why would you protect another journalist's source?
For us, it was more of an issue of why wouldn't we do it. We have one of our core ethics is about source protection. We've seen and lived what happens in these situations. Julian has been in prison, has been detained. Of course, the whole organization watched the Manning trial very closely and saw the persecution that happened there. The fact that the US government, with its intent mission on trying to create an example of what happens if you tell the world the truth, you get thrown in jail, get thrown in a cage, tortured, and then put in prison for 35 years. That's the example that they desperately wanted to set, and unfortunately achieved it with Manning. We felt that it was very important that there was another example of what happens for journalist sources, for whistleblowers, if you do tell the truth. You can still have a voice. You can take part in the debate that you have begun. It was very clear to us right from the beginning that there was no other organization that was willing or able to assist Snowden in a way that would fully protect him. And so it was not really of a question to us or to me about would we help. It was just about doing it.
And what did WikiLeaks do? What was the...
A variety of things, from legal advice, specifically in the region Hong Kong that he was in. Then there was the matter of being able to get out safely from Hong Kong, which we assisted with. We negotiated a number of informal asylum offers so that he would have somewhere to go. And then obviously staying with him to ensure he was protected on the journey, and then what turned out to be a month in an airport, and then 3 months in Russia to ensure that he was protected, that he could keep his voice, and that he was able to continue living as safe as possible.
And you were able to basically witness what was going on and to be a witness for the world, essentially.
Yes, I mean, if anything had happened, he made a comment that I quite liked in his European Parliament statement about how he was with an organisation, protected by an organisation at that time that had the biggest microphone in the world. He's talking about our Twitter account. And that it's kryptonite for spies, and if anyone had tried to pressure him into doing something that he didn't want to do, then the world would have known there was a witness there, as you say.
Do you think the publication strategy of the Snowden disclosures to date has been effective? Given that, I mean, Snowden has talked about the fact that he wanted to, he didn't want to change society, that he wanted to give society a chance to determine if it could change itself. So do you think that that has been effective?
The first point to say is that I think that it's a huge success that anything has come out at all. If he'd gone, history has shown, if he'd gone somewhere directly like the New York Times, they would have just sat on it. I think Laura and Glenn have been extremely brave and done great work. I think it's obvious with regards to the focus of the publications that it's very US focused. So then when talking about the global strategy of this, the information has come out outside of the US in little sort of drips in places around the world that are seemingly at random. A little bit in Italy 1 week, and then next month a little bit in Norway. I think that this has a couple of issues from a global perspective. One is that you end up with a process of normalization and habituation of the information to the global public. It means that there's less outcry. Of course, in some places, here in Germany, for example, certainly within certain communities, there has been a decent outcry. But Germany is definitely one of the more successful international areas of this publication. Laura is based here, and of course Jake Applebaum has been working very hard on these publications as a journalist, and I think this has really has helped the impact here, but it is not this case at all in most countries of the world. People are too used to it. Yeah, we know we're being spied on now is unfortunately for most people the reaction. I also think that for creating a change, within those countries, but also I would say within the US itself. Call me cynical, but I think the fact that the United States government is suddenly going to grow a conscience is not a hugely sane idea. I would say that the best way for a real change to happen is for outside pressure to occur. And when there isn't a coordinated regional, strong publication in certain regions that allows these countries to get to a level of outcry and come together as a region, strengthening each other, then they have more ability to actually stand up against the United States. Germany alone does not have that power, as we have seen with the issues with the inquiry that's sort of starting here.
You know, at the height of Chelsea's 3-year trial, where she was convicted on 20 offenses for 35 years, it was pretty much established that she had no intent to harm the United States, and in fact, she didn't, as determined by the United States government. Damage is not actually the language that's used in the trial, it's impact, it's probable risk, and Manning was convicted on a probable harm standard. The Defense Intelligence Agency did a comprehensive review of all the documents, and William Larkin actually tweeted out that he had found out that the assessment was low to moderate risk. Neither the Afghan war logs or the Iraq war diary the Iraq War logs and the Afghan War diary contain the names of human intelligence sources. They contain the names of people, but the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency review had determined that most of the people were actually already killed on the battlefield, those names. And despite what might be commonly understood, I mean, Wikileaks did approach the State Department with regards to Cablegate and offered to elect, privately elect, if they wished, names, message record numbers. And the legal advisor at the State Department, Harold Koh, his response, that letter that said that Wikileaks was a continuing violation of the law, was the basis for extra-legal sanctions against Wikileaks. At that critical time for Manning, Snowden told Bart Gellman, quote, "I don't desire to enable the Bradley, now Chelsea, Manning argument that these documents were released recklessly and unreviewed." I just would like to say, because this is sort of a common misconception, Manning actually sanitized the documents before they were sent to WikiLeaks, just FYI. You clearly wouldn't agree with the notion that publishing full and unredacted documents is a reckless act. So what has WikiLeaks learned from Manning's releases, from publishing those?
I mean, and thank you for explaining that. I mean, you were at the trial, and I think it's a very important point that people often miss, is that the US government, who, if anybody wanted to try and show that there was any harm actually from this information coming out, it was the US government at that trial, and they were unable to. The whole redaction question has come from and is completely and utterly US propaganda. We saw it when we started with the Warlog publication. They instantly come out with blood on their hands, which is, to me, completely ludicrous that people would accept this. We were actually publishing how the United States government had the blood of over 100,000 people on its hands, and we, for telling the world about this, were suddenly the ones at fault. It's obviously completely wrong. But this is something that they always do. I mean, they've done it since the 50s. Any national security journalist can tell you about the propaganda attacks that they have on them. It was a difficult battle for us through that period of 2010 and going into 2011 to show that this was not actually correct. That the concept that information in and of itself can cause harm is just not logical. I mean, words on a page and bits and bytes of data don't actually cause harm in and of themselves. As you said, the United States government had to admit in the end that there was no harm caused from it. So this was a large battle that we fought and made, I think, great strides in this. To me, it's very sad that the concept of redacting is now being, because they're scared of pressure, is now being lauded up by journalists as how this is responsible journalism. To me, actually taking away our history and denying us of the ability to understand fully and have full access to documents is actually more reckless. And we have seen countless examples in our publishing history of where things that the journalists that we worked with did not decide was necessarily a big story to be told, but actually when that document was published in full at the end, have now become the basis of legal cases around the world where people are finally able to get justice. There's, if I may just tell you one good example of this, actually from to do with a German citizen, Khalid al-Masri, who had the same name as a suspected terrorist. Now, this is a story that came from cables, but it was not actually chosen by journalists. This actually just came out when we published the full archive in full in 2011. So he has the same name as a terrorist, and when he's on holiday in Macedonia, he gets kidnapped by the CIA, secretly renditioned, taken to a torture camp in Syria, moved on to Afghanistan, where he's also tortured. Eventually, the CIA sort of worked out they'd got the wrong person, but they still kept him for 4 months before dumping him back in the Balkans. And he tried for a long time to get any justice for what had happened to him. And he was unable to until we did our publication, and he found this cable about himself, which had been deemed of no public interest to anybody before. He was then finally able to take a case. He used our cables, and he there was finally a judgment made which used the cables in the judgment. So I think this shows that just allowing a few people to decide what we should know without giving us a full archive is problematic for our whole history and for justice for individuals.
I think it seems to me too, I think with the complexity of the global environment and the global media, it's, in my opinion too, with full archives, you're also able to exploit the subject matter experts from around the globe to look at, it's my opinion that like people would say, well, in terms of the Manning trial, like, oh, well, you obviously have an opinion about this trial, so therefore you're not objective. There's nothing more objective than a document or a transcript.
And the full source documents as well. I think if you get a one-page of a PDF, what if there's a big but on the next page? I mean, I think you need the full archive. You need to see pieces of information within a context. One star does not make a whole constellation. It changes the nature when you see it, and you can build these relationships. I think also that there's a big lesson that we found with Cablegate, where we actually said that the media organizations, because apparently they would have maybe some particular expertise in an area they were writing on. Silly idea, I know. That they could suggest the redactions. And we actually went through and we compared these. And all the redactions were due to reasons of libel, political reasons. The media organizations agreed to redact an individual's name if they were in imminent harm, imminent immediate danger of loss of life. And in fact, they were redacting names of large companies or politicians that were, doing criminal acts around the world. So just the whole process of redaction is actually corrupting, and the reasons why people redact are not necessarily as they say.
So let's talk about this issue of redactions. What kind of considerations does WikiLeaks make in evaluating how the organization is going to handle documents that it receives?
As a general sort of principle, we have learned, we made a mistake actually with the Iraq war logs, where we redacted too much. We'd been hit with this massive propaganda attack, and so we started after the Afghan war logs. So we started with the Iraq war logs to ensure that this couldn't happen again. And the actual process we went through was we essentially started off with everything was redacted, and then we put it back out there. So dictionary words went back out, etc. What you then ended up with was a data set that was essentially completely unusable for the public. So this was then after having survived this propaganda battle, having had the court case where even the government, in the Manning court case where the government could not prove harm, we have now understood that actually the way to approach publication is you start from the assumption that everything should be out. The public deserve their historical archive and they should know everything. If one hypothetically does need to look at a redaction, it should be very specific. It should be about immediate and imminent real danger to someone's loss of life, and it should only be on a timed, for a short period of time.
Would WikiLeaks ever approach the government or redact documents again in the future?
Working with the government is something else that we have found to be corrupting. It was interesting, Ewan McCaskill from The Guardian did a talk just the other day where he sort of explained how they'd gone to the White House about the NSA revelations, who'd helped them understand these documents, and had also showed them that quite a number of these stories shouldn't come out. So you can see quite blatantly there that the government is restricting our access to this understanding by media organizations working with them. Yes, we did go to the government, we did interact with the government before Cablegate, but the actual details of this are that the government made the US government made a public display of how, if we were to publish this, it would cause harm. Now, what they were doing there was they were setting up a legal basis for intent, so that afterwards they could say, well, you knew this would cause harm, therefore you intentionally did this, and it's the legal basis for a case. So, of course, to this we had to respond. So our lawyers contacted the government and said, as you mentioned, okay, if there's harm, where is it? What can we do about it? To which they didn't respond. So I think this is just another example of how it's not, even they did not really see a harm, certainly didn't care about any supposed harm, and that this was just another propaganda attack.
So would you see the organization ever doing that again, approaching the...
If we needed to respond in the way that we had there, I don't see us sort of approaching a government, because it just opens yourself up to be lent on in how you publish.
Let me ask you this question. I mean, to me, I think Wikileaks is born of the internet. You know, in a certain sense, it has a different, even full source documents, you know, vis-a-vis sort of search capabilities. Even in publishing public information with an anti-trial, there is a nature to having an archive that is found in a particular way on the internet, and it's structured in a particular way. It's delivered to the quote-unquote audience or the user in a different way. And there's no question, for me at least, there is a sort of, to use sort of common terms, a sort of disruptive innovation of WikiLeaks. You know, it's a publisher, it's a library, it's a lot of different things. In what ways do you believe that WikiLeaks is different from other publishers? Let's kind of talk about traditional media and then newer media.
I think that someone has to be at the front of pushing the boundaries of press freedom. Someone has to have the guts, essentially, to be able to stand there and to take these hits. And I think that we're pretty uniquely set up to do this in the way that we are able to, we've decentralized enough, we have a robust enough structure that we're not beholden to a certain jurisdiction or pressure from a certain jurisdiction. Then, of course, there is the fact that we will always publish full source documents. The concept, we use the term scientific journalism. In the same way that scientists will always publish the full initial data they've worked with to draw their conclusions and their analysis, we will always publish the full archive and the full document set. Then there are these additional sort of, I guess, added elements that we believe very strongly in creating these searchable archives, ensuring that information is accessible but also usable for the public. We do our own analysis, our own articles, but it is these additional elements that we provide that we believe very strongly in, that I would say set us apart from other organizations.
When you look at the way in which the Snowden releases have been, have done battle, so to speak, to use that term, with the NSA, how would you compare it to Manning's disclosures against the Pentagon, where you publish these disclosures?
I mean, obviously both battles are large. Taking on in one way or another the United States government is no mean feat. With regards to the specific parts of the government that we, to use the word you just used, battled with, the Pentagon has had a large spin machine in place, a PR department in place for a long period of time. It's huge, it has a lot of money thrown at it, there are people that are there putting out articles all the time. So to go up against this, and they knew we had Cablegate in advance, so they were already pre-prepped. You had Clinton phoning up ambassadors around the world saying, oh, this might come out, this might be there, something that you need to deal with. So we already went into this publication with them having created a whole defense point against it. The difference between that and the NSA is that they have been built on the concept that they don't exist. So their ability to come back and attack, especially right at the beginning when they did not know that this was about to happen, is far smaller than the Pentagon's abilities.
And the State Department, I mean, interestingly enough, the Wikileaks Persons at Risk group, the 24/7, that was specifically set up to deal with media because Clinton was about to go on a worldwide tour.
And the task force, don't forget, WTF.
Right, that was the CIA, right?
Yeah.
But specifically the State Department had known for 6 months that Manning had likely disclosed diplomatic cables, and they knew which database it was from. And so it was interesting, as the releases started to begin, that they feigned sort of complete surprise. They had already done, the chiefs of missions from all the embassies around the world had already done a review and contacted their counterparts and the like, so they were totally prepped for that. I wanted to know if we are capable of doing a Q&A at some point, if there's any questions from the audience. Is that possible? Is there anybody out there?
Anybody that works here know if we can do a Q&A? Does anybody work here?
This lady over here has a question. I can repeat your question if you want to just...
I wanted to ask, what is Edward Snowden going to do when his visa in Russia runs out in a couple of months' time?
So the question is what is Edward Snowden going to do when his temporary asylum runs out?
What exactly he's actually going to do is obviously up to his legal team. He has several options in that he can reapply in Russia for the same temporary asylum, which is an asylum that lasts a year. It's different from the sort of political asylum that they have, which other countries have, which then is more a lifetime status. Obviously, he could also try and apply in other countries. My personal opinion is from very sadly how things seem to be displayed in other countries. For example, Germany, is that the governments are not feeling strong enough to actually stand up for him. So you've got 2 months to sort your government out, people.
Something that I wanted to talk to you about was when you first arrived, Der Spiegel had done a piece.
They're the media partners here.
I don't care.
Yeah, go on.
Which to me was a bit pejorative to some degree. Having spoken to you, I have respect for you and the work that you've done. I think it's been really courageous and rigorous. I want to talk to you a little bit about that.
That particular article? Or
just in general about, your role and your...
I think it's a difficult thing because by the nature of the sort of the attacks that we get and therefore the security that we need, we tended to have not, with the vast majority of staff, we don't say exactly what they do because it's then easy to become a target. If our entire organisation was able to be mapped out of exactly who did what, it would then be very easy for the CIA or whoever to start targeted attacks. Julian made a very conscious decision after pressure from the media to put a face to the organisation after some time when we didn't have one, to go out there and say, yes, I head up this organisation, and became a complete lightning rod so that the rest of us could have a level of protection. So I suppose with that sort of background, as people started to become known, then it's maybe difficult for media to understand who we are. I have found an interesting experience, though, in that I have worked with a lot of our media organizations. They know what I do because they work with me on certain publications, so they know when I've done X, Y, or Z. So I found it very sad when those journalists that I have worked with call me a companion of Snowden, or cleaner is the other one, and I organised a party apparently, according to someone once. So it's interesting, I suppose, why they do this. I think it's an easy way to try to delegitimize the organisation if you can play down everyone's roles. It's just Julian and then some cleaners and party people, rather than an actual legitimate publishing organisation that's, I'm biased, but I would say doing a better job than most of them. So yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon of why they can't do this.
You know, I'd like for you to talk to me about the value of archives. You talked a little bit about it. You know, Wikileaks has various types of documents. Certainly, they have documents other than just simply Manning's releases as well. So, you know, one of the projects that I really like quite well is Plus D, is the Public Library of U.S. Diplomacy. Can we talk a little bit about, you know, the fact that Wikileaks sort of doesn't just publish censored material, that they also publish material that is hard to access?
Yeah, from the beginning, our mission has been to publish classified or in any other way censored information that is of political, historical importance. And we have always felt this, the concept of having archives and full sets of information. And also with archives, it's about having those collections made usable and being able to create relationships between different sets of documents. If you have a whole archive of cables, Plus D that you mentioned, for example, is, yes, it's a compendium of leaked cables, but also declassified cables, and it is now the largest collection of United States diplomatic cables online in the world. It's over 2 million, and by searching it and using it, you can actually see the relationship far better to analyze these sorts of documents than you can if you just read one cable and then go back.
It's interesting because, I mean, in my discussions with other journalists at other organizations, like, for example, the Washington Post, they use, you know, Plus D and Wikileaks every single day in their work.
And you can see stories come out that link to it on the internet every single day. So it's of ongoing historical importance.
Yes, we have a question here.
Where?
Right up front.
Oh, I'm going to glance it on.
Take your time, Danny. If you ask it, I'll repeat it.
Just talk amongst yourselves.
Hi, Diani Beretta from Mulholland Foundation and the Free Chelsea Manning Network. It's glad to see you on stage. It's a really amazing thing. As we're approaching the year anniversary of the Snowden revelations, we've had an absurd turn of events happening in Germany, because now we have U.S. legal firms writing legal opinions for the German government, threatening parliamentarians and not wanting to acknowledge their immunity were they to travel to the U.S. So now parliamentarians are also in a very difficult situation. You said we have 2 months to rally for the government here. I want to ask you, what can we, because I'd like to take advantage that we're here in Republica, we have viewers worldwide and in Germany, what can we actually do right now? Do you think it's maybe wise to petition to the European High Court for Human Rights, or any other campaigns that we should start now? I think people are a little bit at a loss. They don't know what else to do because there's political inertia in their own government. Thank you.
Yeah, the legal advice that you're referring to was very interesting because the situation to do with the inquiry is that the minority are able to call for Snowden to be a witness, which I think basically the government sort of had to go along with for a bit. And you can see these sorts of tricks now coming into play where they're trying to find reasons why they can't actually let this happen. So I think it's very important to keep the pressure on here in Germany so that the minority is able to succeed. I think also that it is important that other countries in Europe stand with Germany and say that they won't let the US have dominance over Germany and that they will support Germany if it were to offer Snowden asylum. So although it's become quite big within the German political sphere, quite a big topic, I think it's also very important when you're looking at something like this that other nations, so I know there's quite a lot of people here from the international audience, if people could go and get their politicians to stand in solidarity with Germany and show that there is support, that Germany won't just have to stand alone against the US, I think that that's a way in which hopefully someone can stand up against the United States government.
Sarah, a question about the world where you want to live.
Sorry, can you speak up? I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to ask about the world where you want to live. Is it a world where every data is free? Like free information for everyone? Or is it a world where privacy is respected? And do you think it's possible? Or do you think with the amount of technical data around us exploding, it is not possible in the end?